Welcome to a special edition of the podcast. I have the opportunity to talk to someone who I've wanted to spend some time talking to for a while now. He's one of the most interesting folks. He's one of, if not the youngest police chief in the country. He's got a fascinating background as to how he got there. And so I am thrilled to have the chief from Brookford, North Carolina, Chief Will Armstrong, on the show today. Chief, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's always good to be here.
All right. So let's start with this, where we are today, right? You are either one of the youngest or the youngest police chief in the country. And I say that because we're not sure, right? If
Right.
you're actually the youngest, right?
Yeah, correct. Yes, sir.
How old are you?
25.
25 years old, and you are the police chief.
Yeah. Yeah. 25 years old. I did not know I was going to be one of the youngest whenever I took the job, but after it was over, it became apparent everybody was calling and saying, man, you're the youngest chief. I did find out I'm the youngest chief in the state of North Carolina.
All right. That part's for sure. How did you get there? How did you become the chief of police at age 25?
I think I had a quite a bit of life experience that I think kind of helped along making law enforcement an easy transition for me. I originally started. I got in as early as you can get in at 20 years old in the state, and I think I swore not very long after my 20th birthday with a town called or a city. It's actually called the City of Statesville, and I went in there at 20 years old. I worked there for 2 years doing a variety of different things. And eventually I then left and I would go on to Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, which is a county over. And I worked there for 2 years. But in the 2 years I was working there, I was also working at the Town of Brookford part-time for extra income to kind of supplement my income. And the chief at the time thought that I kind of grasped the new stuff that he was having trouble with as far as computer systems and recruiting and stuff like that. So he's like, man, he just kind of kept laying on other responsibilities for me, and I kept doing it. And eventually, when the job would come open, and I did apply for it, I actually waited to like the very last day because I wasn't really sure at the time. I was like, man, I'm gonna get some judgment on here because that's one thing that's always held me back is my age, man. And I waited, and then I'd actually ran into a city council member, and people just around the town just kept saying, "Will, you gotta apply. You've gotta apply." And I'm like, they're like, you'd be great at this. And I thought, well, I mean, I thought that I could handle it and I could do it. I felt comfortable in doing the job, but you just get a lot of age discrimination. But one thing that's been able to help me move, I think, is kind of faster through the tracks is even when I worked at Statesville Police Department, my first job, they would always say, man, you're grasping this really quickly. You seem to really know the concept. And one thing that has helped me and benefited me in my life that I never thought it would was my childhood. And so
Well, I want to talk about that in a second, but
okay.
let me just finish the police chief part of this. So did anyone have to sign off on this? I mean, is there anyone who's like you apply for the job? Is there any like city council or anyone else who says, hold on a sec, we got a guy who's 25 years old who's going to be the police chief?
Yeah. Well, there was. So when I applied for it, it actually went through an outside agency called the Western Piedmont Council of Government, and they held the process. So part of the process was like you had to put a PowerPoint together, and I believe some testing, things like that went into it. And they had other candidates that probably would have been very well suited for the job, but they thought, man, we're going to give him a shot because they couldn't believe they thought I was very intelligent based off of my performance and just what I had known from the town as a whole. So I had a really interesting concept though, because I had two city council members that were like, this is our guy. We want this guy. And after they interviewed the other candidates, the other two candidates were like, the other two councilmen, we had 4 total. And the other 2 city council members were like, we don't want him coming in here. He's too young. He can't do it. It's just, it'd be detrimental if he messed up for his career, those kind of things. And so they were really concerned about it. Ultimately, why I got the job was because when the two of them voted yes, 2 of them voted no, And the mayor was like, "I'm the tiebreaker. I like Willie Armstrong." He's like, we're bringing him in," and he broke the tie, and so that's how I got in here. And
Amazing, amazing.
yeah,
And do you have, any folks who either work for you or others who are a little taken aback by the fact that the boss is 25?
oh yeah, yeah. I kind of went through a little phase when I first started this that there was some people here that they've done 25 and 30 years, and they've earned their respect, no doubt about it. But they were concerned that they gave it to me, and they felt like, man, I'm not going to take no directions from a 25-year-old. And so that's why I've always said the age thing has always kind of held you back, even if you're kind of competent in what you're talking about. It doesn't matter. Some people they'll focus on that and kind of just zoom in on that factor of the career. But when that took place and the mayor finally made the final decision about it, I came in here and I worked extremely hard in the first year I've been here. I mean, I've been able to do things like get us a grant, worth $25,000, and that was able to award us like equipment that we didn't have. When I came in, we were in a completely paper format, so we were still old school. That's how old school it was. Everything
Wow.
was your reports were handwritten. Your everything was still handwritten, and so the chief here at the time, he was very old school fella, and
Yep.
so we needed. The town was looking for something new, something fresh.
All right.
So
So you mentioned your childhood, and that was definitely a factor in your application, right? So first, let me just ask you, what, and this relates to your childhood, what got you interested in law enforcement?
so for me, it started when I was a young child. I think I knew I wanted to be a police officer at probably like the age of 5, and that was just because my family was involved in so many domestic violence episodes at the house, and I actually grew up kind of in and out of foster care. And I say that meaning, it was one of those things that you go one of two ways when you're in and out of foster care and your parents are constantly being arrested for this. You don't want to get into law enforcement, and you think that, you know, uh, you're the police are the bad guys, or you do want to get into law enforcement. Luckily, I started actually skating at a local skating rink as a kid, since I've been 5, and so at that skating rink was a local off-duty officer who worked there to supplement his income. His name was Ray Ollis. I met him when I was like 5 years old, and he was a big mentor in my life at the time because once I realized that I liked law enforcement, and for me, when I'd see the police come and they'd come to arrest, my father, because my father would have terrible episodes of just assaults on my mother. I mean, I can think of times where he would lock us in rooms and I'd have to climb out of windows to go try to run and call 911 because he's beat my mom so bad, or he tried to light my mom on fire with gasoline. And I think about those situations, and I was the only one able to go get help. And every time that I was able to go get any help, the only person that seemed that would help us was law enforcement. So when they showed up, they were the good guys for me. And even though they were taking him to jail and it was such a traumatizing experience, those are the good guys. Um, you know, that escalated on to later on to when I met Ray Ollis at the skating rink. I had developed this kind of, I wanted to know what he did, how his job worked and stuff. And he would talk to me and be a very good, friendly mentor as a child. And then as I got older, I continued talking to him. And he didn't know necessarily at the time that I was going through everything I was going through at home. So he would just see me at the skating rink and I'd be gone for 6 months. And he'd see me and I'd be gone for a year or 2 years or whatever.
Why were you talk about why you were in and out of foster care? I mean, you mentioned that your mom was a victim of
Yeah.
domestic violence. Why,
My
why did
mother,
you, yeah.
Yeah, my mother, she was a victim of domestic violence, but she also had her own issues. I think she kind of really relied on my father heavily, even though he wasn't good for her. She didn't want to be alone, and so she kind of followed in his footsteps when she was with him. But when she wasn't with him, she was okay. So I would go in and out of foster care because she couldn't leave him alone, and the domestic violence acts were too much. So social services would get involved and say, your son's in an unsafe home because of the fighting. And then they also had a very bad problem at one point in time with drug usage. Um, Before I can remember being 5 and 6 years old and knowing what a crack rock looked like because I was going out with them to buy it. or riding out in the middle of the night to go search for it. Or, I saw prostitution with my parents. I saw all these things go on that I should have never saw at the age I did. And eventually DSS would get called and police would show up at the house, and they'd forward over a report to Department of Social Services, and Child Protective Services would come out, and I'd be gone again. And my mother would work very hard to try to get me back, because the judge would issue stipulations for her to get me back. And she would leave my father for whatever time it would take to get me back. And she'd go through and get a job and start working and doing all these things that she should have been doing. And then the judge would issue me custody back over there with her, and I'd go back. And then 6 months later, she'd end up following, she'd see my father come back in the picture. We're back at the square one again, and I'm gone again. But my always assumption was they just thought that it was an unsafe home. I actually have talked to some of those social workers recently, actually yesterday, the ones that remember me, and I was down there doing a lunch and learn. So it's about local leaders in the county that how they got to where they got. And one of the things we were teaching was for the Department of Social Services. And I actually ran into my social workers from when I was a child yesterday, and I couldn't believe it. And we talked about, these things, but at the time when you're a kid, you don't realize that how bad these things are, how much it's traumatizing, what you see. But that set me up for success later on that I wouldn't realize. Absolutely. I didn't have, you're 20 years old, there's no way that you know anything about being a police officer, but I would excel past the normal group. And I always kind of had that factor about me, because I had to have a mindset that I wanted different for my life. You either become a product of your surrounding, or you do something to change it. And somehow I was able to pick that up at a very, very young age. And it's hard for a lot of people. For me, I could have easily ended up doing the same route that my parents went, with drugs and alcohol and just crime and theft. But, I grew up, like I said, seeing them go from, I would go in and watch my father take metal theft things off of the clothes, so that he could, anti-shopping devices, so that he could exit the store. I grew up watching him go smoke marijuana. I knew how you rolled marijuana. I knew how you went and bought crack rocks. How where you would go and get these things from, where you go get illegal alcohol from. I mean, all these things I grew up seeing it. I saw prostitution. I saw every crime that there was growing up as a child. And even though it was never something that I should have saw, it set me up, because that life experience, when I became a law enforcement, I was able to pick these things out. I could see these things, and they'd be like, man, you should know this stuff. Yeah. You're 21 years old, and you're able, I can look at somebody and say, man, this is what they're doing. This is how they package it. This is how they're like, man, he is really, but I grew up in that criminal element. So
did it feel wrong at the time? I mean, did it feel bad at the time, or did it just feel like, just something my parents do?
I think when I got old enough to realize that it was wrong, it did feel bad, because you were always scared that they were going to go to jail if they got caught. You are always worried that if they get caught, they're gone. And so when I realized that it was not something they're supposed to do, and you're realizing that they're hiding from police and doing these things that they're not supposed to be doing, that's when that factor kicked in, that this doesn't feel right. But as a child, you don't have a say so you're there for whatever they got to do. And when DSS comes and knocks on the door, my parents are telling me to lie to them. They're saying, hey, don't tell them about this. Don't tell them about this fight that happened yesterday. Don't talk about, what mom and dad did when they went over here and bought and we're doing this, and even though I was old enough to have to know at 7 years old and 8 years old, like, I'm not supposed to talk about this. So that's when it really became, okay, I shouldn't, this is something I'm not supposed to know. And that's when that factor started feeling wrong. Yeah.
Did you ever get into drugs or crime yourself?
I didn't. Because of everything that I saw, it turned my stomach. Like I've never smoked marijuana. None of that stuff ever was appealing to me, because when you grow up, I guess, and I seen that, and I'm watching my father every morning, last thing he does before he goes to bed at 2:00 in the morning is crack open a beer and smoke a blunt or do whatever he's going to do. And first thing in the morning, he's cracking open a beer, smoking marijuana. Same thing again. You realize, like, this is how he got there. I don't want any part of that. So for me, it turned me completely that I was scared to even think of, if, even in school when somebody would offer, you're always going to get some kind of pressure at some point in time as a child. I just was like, absolutely not. Like, and I had that mindset. And
Mm.
that was the only great thing I guess I can say that came from that.
How were the foster families that you were with?
The foster families I was with was never, they were never, they never really treated you like their kids or did anything I can think of really outrageous that made me think, you know, these people were better than my family. It's amazing how blind you can feel. Um, you know, even though you're going through all this and you're seeing everything that your parents are doing, you're sitting there thinking to your head, like, I'd still rather be home than go in foster care because that's your parents, regardless of what they do or how they do it. As long as you're not miserable. And I wasn't miserable because my parents still, in their own crazy, sick way, tried to go out of their way to provide for me. I can remember, even though they were doing these things, they still wanted to make sure, like when Heelys came out, I can remember my mom and father going to the mall and stealing me a new pair of Heelys and coming back. And I didn't know how they got it, but when I learned later on in life and we talked about these things, that those were the things they were doing because they still wanted to see me happy. Even though they were doing what they were doing, they felt, I think, a guilt that they've got to keep me happy. And so, you know, I guess it's a very interesting twist on the way that things work. But I don't know. I guess I would almost say that they really did. They tried in their own little way, that it was something that I really couldn't explain or understand at the time.
And so, with that life experience, how does that now play into your work as a police officer and now as a police chief?
That life experience has been amazing for me. I mean, it's taught me how to, for one, I'm able to recognize crime immediately. When I go out on a scene and I see something domestic violence related or drug related or prostitution related or something that those things, I can tell sometimes. I can go to that scene and I can see when a child is going through maybe something that I've gone through. And, you can tell if you get called out on a DSS case and you're out there to assist social services, if that child's lying or not. Those things, I look for the other red flags that they may not see, because a lot of times, they'll DSS will come out to a case, and if they walk in your house, they do their inspection, you have food in your fridge, your parents are answering the questions appropriately, you're answering the questions appropriately for your parents, they document that and the case is closed.
Mm.
But and we had that happen several times because they were always in and out of our life, but it didn't mean everything was okay. There were so many things going on behind closed doors.
When you see that, do you want to help social services take that child out of that family, or based on your own experience, you have, sort of divided feelings about that and sort of think, oh, kid might still be better even staying in a tough environment?
No, I definitely, now being older, knowing I know, I think the child should be removed from the circumstances. I don't blame DSS for doing what they had to do, because now I realize, like, it was a very, very screwed up environment. But as a child, you don't see that. You just think, man, I want to be at home with my parents because that's your parents. And it's hard to, even though it's not the best thing for you, but you don't see what's best for you at that age. And so you just see that's your parents. And especially when you go to a foster home like I did, and these people don't treat you like family. They don't treat you anything like your home life. You've been used to being at home, and those things don't change. And actually, my last foster home that I was in was shut down because of allegations of the foster dad inappropriately touching or molesting a minor.
Oh
So,
boy.
um, and these are the things that, at some point you kind of think, well, maybe I was better off at home. But that when you have something like that going on, I wasn't involved, but I actually was part of the person that brought it up. Me and another kid that lived in the home, um, we we suspected that the foster dad would have his niece. It was his young niece that would come over quite regularly. So it wasn't a foster child, but he would have his young niece come over quite regularly. And in the middle of the night, she would sleep in the rooms with us. He would come in there and get her and take her into the bedroom or take her into the living room and these kind of things. And we didn't know really what was going on. And so um, once we got old enough, I mean, we were smart enough to realize something's not right here. And so I brought it to I think I had a guidance counselor at school, and I brought it up to my guidance counselor, and I told her what was going on, and she immediately called my caseworker and told them what was going on. Well, of course, he denied any kind of allegations, but the things that we were seeing, like him standing over top of a weird position that we were describing, I remember at the time, we knew something was not right. And they, at first, actually dismissed that. They said, we don't have any proof anything's going on. They actually let us stay in the home.
Hmm.
I do remember that when
Wow.
we stayed in the home. I think after a few weeks, I think Department of Social Services decided, I think, to go on the safe side. They were going to move all the children and actually they were going to shut the home down. And so when they decided to shut the home down, I think I had been in there maybe a little over a year or so at this point in time, and my mother was doing better. She was off of drugs. She was clean, and she had her own place and got her car and all these things that the judge has stipulated. So one day I'm doing a weekend visit with my mom, and the social worker calls and says, "Do you think you can get your child back and forth to school for the rest of the week?" And she's like, "Yeah." He's like, "How about the rest of the school year?" And she's like, "Absolutely." And they ended up letting me go back home. Well, they shut the home down out of, I think, like a precautionary measure, not really knowing what was going on, what wasn't. But a year later, I had a guardian ad litem who actually called along with my caseworker to say they were sorry they didn't believe me and didn't hear what I'd said, that the foster dad had actually gotten caught, I think, by his wife, um, inappropriately touching or molesting the niece of his that was over there. And so it was a big deal. They called and, wanted to tell us that we weren't crazy, that we did see what we saw, and that they're sorry that they didn't take it, because they actually at the time, and I can remember them thinking and actually having conversations with us, you don't need to tell these lies just so you can go back home with your parents. They didn't want us, they thought we
Right.
were making these things up because we were just desperate to get back home.
Right.
And it wasn't the case. So, you know, my life, it's been an amazing story, but it's just, it's always been one thing after another. But that's why I kind of have mixed feelings. Sometimes these homes aren't as safe. If you're going to put a child in a home, I guess that's a big factor. But there's only so much you can do when you screen people. You never
Mhm.
know people behind closed doors.
And so all of this has led you to think of law enforcement as the good guys, right?
Yeah, yeah. Law enforcement's just always been the good guys for me. I mean, you know, I can remember, I'm recalling a time. I remember there was one time when my mom and dad had got into an argument when I was younger. And my dad, I can remember him dragging my mom out of the house by her hair and into the front of the house, and they're underneath a street light. And I remember him kicking her in the ribs over and over again, and punching her in the face and all these things. And I remember running out, and I was probably 7, 8 years old. And I ran outside, and I'm trying to push my dad off my mom. I'm telling him, get off of her, please stop. And I'm crying and carrying on. And it just felt like it was never going to stop. And I remember him pushing me down and not, telling me to get away. And as all this is going on, all of a sudden, I remember the Hickory Police Department, which is where I live now. Hickory Police, they show up, by 5, 6, 7 officers, and one of those officers, till this day, is actually a chief of police in a neighboring city near me. At the time, he was on patrol. His name is Vidal Sipe, and I remember talking to Vidal. He gave me a teddy bear, and he said, "Man, you're going to be okay." He said, "You're going to be okay." And I remember him talking to me and showing me stickers and stuff. But I remember how distraught I was at the time, and I remember him giving me that teddy bear and just telling me everything was going to be okay and all this stuff. And DSS actually came out that night, I think, and removed me that night because of that. And I can just remember the only person that gave me that relief that night, because I was tore up, and I was worried about my mom, and I think my mom ended up going to the hospital and stuff. And the only person that gave me relief was the police. And I can remember thinking right then and there, one day I'm going to give back. I'm going to do exactly what they did. I want to help people the way that they did, because they helped me.
Mm.
They came when nobody else was coming. I thought we were, when a fight goes on in general in law enforcement, you think it's happening for a lifetime. But when you're out there as a child, and that was going on, it felt like it was going on forever. And I'll just never forget law enforcement showing up, and that sigh of relief that I got there when they came.
So how do you feel now when you see many people attacking law enforcement? Some people are supportive, right? A lot of people,
Yeah.
but there are also a lot of people who are regularly critical of law enforcement for a variety of reasons. What do you make of that?
Man, it's absolutely sickening, man. When I go back and I think about, don't get me wrong, there's bad police officers, but there's also bad judges. There's bad lawyers. There's people that do the wrong thing in every profession. We get that spotlight because of how much we have the power to take somebody's freedom. And when you have the power to take somebody's freedom, somebody told me when I first came into this, it's one of the highest powers in the world because you can take someone's freedom and you don't take that lightly. And we make mistakes because we're human and we're not we're prone. I mean, by default, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to do everything perfect. And so when I see now what's going on with law enforcement, it really just cringes my stomach because I think about if it wasn't for these guys, I don't know where I'd be today. I think about Ray Ollis, my captain. I think about the guys that came and helped us out. These guys don't know what they're walking into. And I knew that at the time. And I thought, man, it's just really brave and noble. And that was a really respected profession, in my opinion, as a child, because I was like, these people are going to do something that nobody else would. And, you know, it's hard to see that these people have so many people have lost respect for authority. They've lost respect for law enforcement and to try to grasp that and understand why I will never be able to, because we go from everything from the barking dog complaint at 2 o'clock in the morning to sorting out getting your belongings at your house to the double homicide to the school shooting, and those things escalate from 0 to 100 at any time.
Hmm.
And when you know that and you see that firsthand, and I think about and just the guidance part of it, a lot of what we do is almost like therapy. I used to tell people, I'm like, sometimes I feel like an underpaid therapist because
Yeah.
you have to come out here and babysit and sort all of these people's problems out. And that's just part of it. That's just a very small part of it. But and then when you have to come out here, you have to babysit people, you have to sort their problems out. They want you to solve the world's problems. They also want you to do it perfectly and not make a mistake. The expectations are unrealistic. And so when I see them scrutinizing law enforcement and I think about Ray, I think, he didn't have to, when I was that young, spend hours sitting there at a skating ring, talk to me and ask me how I was doing in school and how everything was going in my life, and spend that time to kind of mentor me or take me under his wing. That was not something that he had to do, but he did it because he wanted to make an impact. He enjoyed what he had done. And, in reality, he was just there to watch the money at the door, to make sure nobody ran out of the skating ring and robbed the place, or that the kids were safe. Nobody came in with a gun. That was his only job. That's all he had to do. But him to take the time to go down and sit down with all these kids, it wasn't just me, ask us how we're doing, ask how school, things that we weren't getting done at home that you were that person for. Our parents weren't checking on our schoolwork or what I had going on. That was the least thing that we had going on. But the fact that he done those things, he didn't have to. And law enforcement do that every day across the country. Still till this day, they're out here doing extra things that they don't have to do, and every day more things are getting added to us. Traffic, that now they'll have you out here, you're directing traffic, they want you to respond out with mental health for mental health situations and stuff. Things that used to be medical are now turned into law enforcement problems. You're having to get cross-trained in these things. But nothing's changing for us. We don't do it for very much money. None of us get into it for the money. And so when you're adding all these things, our pay's not changing, but yet we're out here still doing what we want to do because we want to protect the public, and we want to protect people, and we want to make sure everybody has a safe environment. We want our communities that we live in to be safe. And we care about it. So when I see the disgust and the scrutinization of law enforcement, it makes me sick, because people really need to have a wake up call and really understand what we're doing out here and why we do it, and just give us and we've got to start turning back the tides of getting some kind of respect back again for law enforcement. That's a noble profession, and people's expectations are getting too unrealistic of how perfect that we're supposed to be.
Do you see that in the field when you're out
Absolutely.
there?
Yeah. I mean, I go out to calls sometimes. When I worked at Statesville, it was a very high gang related area. And the majority of it was children, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. And they're out here shooting each other and stabbing each other and fighting each other and doing all these things that you're like, what? But, I actually remember, I think there was a 13-year-old before I had left there that decided to show up and shoot his girlfriend's dad in the head and kill him, and it was like, these are the things that these kids were doing every day. And it's getting worse and worse. And you go out there and they're FU police, they're calling us pigs, they're calling us this, every time that I'm out there. Even when I do traffic stops now, some people are like, yeah, instead of just giving you the respect, when you stop somebody and you say, I just need your license and registration. This is the reason I'm stopping you. This is my name. I always introduce myself, say, this is my name. This is the reason I'm stopping you. Any reasons you were doing whatever violations you were doing. And that's just how I introduce myself. And you'd be surprised how many times, you get somebody that's just like, they're disrespectful. They only want to roll the window down a quarter of an inch, or they want to play this game. They don't want to cooperate. They'll you've got my name. Look it up on my tag. Just things like that cause their reaction. I mean, their actions cause a reaction. That's what I tell people. Their actions cause a reaction. Even in these police brutality cases where these people are saying, the officer done this. The officer did make a mistake in a lot of these things, but we need to go back to the aspect of your action caused our reaction, whether that reaction was wrong. Yes, maybe we pulled a taser on you, and we were mean to pull a taser on you, pulled a gun and shot you. And that's bad training and poor performance on our end. But do we ever go back to the aspect anymore of that would have not happened had you just complied? I would have never got the mix up to pull a gun out on you had you just turned around and put your hands behind your back. But we're not focusing on that. We're only focusing on, this is what the officer did. And now you've got DA's office, they're kind of making examples out of us. And it's scary. It's a scary time for anybody getting into law enforcement, because you got the DA's office, like, where they would normally give this guy, 6 months probation for that same charge that you just committed as an officer. They're like, no, we got to show the public.
And
it's scary.
And it does seem that a lot of people also view policing through a racial prism as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I go out there and I'm called Uncle Tom. I'm called, I'm racist just because I'm in there. I'm not seen. There's several ways that goes. Sometimes in the black community, I'm black, so I go out there and talk to them, and they don't want to hear what I got to say because they profile me as, well, you with them white people, you this, you that, and I've heard these exact statements before, and they don't want to talk to you because you're associated with police. And then the minute something takes place, the first thing we're looking at is the race. We're not looking at the demographics of the city. We're not looking at these other aspects of why it was a black person that got hurt or whatever the case may have been. And I came from a city that we had majority, unfortunate black on black crime. It was young black males on other young black males, and that crime rate was much, much higher than anything police related. Across the country, it's always like that, though. But we're not focusing on those aspects. We're only focusing on the law enforcement aspects, it seems like, in the media that have killed black people, armed, unarmed. It's the first thing that they bring color into it, and it just makes my job even harder, even as a black officer.
Let me ask you a final question. How do you think you stayed out of trouble? I mean, considering the upbringing you had, sure, you had good role models in law enforcement, but you're still a kid. You were still, 8, 9, 10, till you were, I guess, 18, living in and out of foster homes, probably being approached by gangs. You had the possibility of living some level of criminal element throughout your life. How did you avoid
it? I just kind of looked at it like, I've learned now our life is a series of choices. And I was blessed to understand that at a young age, that our life is a series of choices. And I knew that if I made the wrong series of choices, I would end up in the same predicament that my mother and my father was. And I saw that, and I saw where they were at. And then I thought about where their parents were, and I thought about where their parents were, I grew up with no other family, and I didn't mention that, but I grew up with no other family besides my mother and my father. So all my grandparents were dead before I was born. I didn't have any aunts or uncles because any family that was associated with my mom, they cut her off. And then my father, all his family were in doing the same things that he was doing. So there was nobody else there. It was always just us. And I think I really looked at those situations and I thought, man, I've got to change this some kind of way. Some kind of way. I remember being in middle school and thinking these plans. I said, some kind of way I've got to change so that I have a family. When I have a family one day, it doesn't end up like this. And I knew that, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I would put little goals to achieve. So, my first job was when I was 14 years old. I started at McDonald's. And the time I was there, I think by the time I was 15, they were making me a crew trainer, which was kind of like a supervisory role. They said, and then by the time I was leaving there, I was probably 16. They were making me a shift manager for the same chain. And I was like 16, like, man, I'm doing, really well, but I had work ethic. So those were my goals. And then when I said, okay, I can't be a police officer until I'm 20. So what am I going to do in the meantime? So I started putting a goal together, something to keep my mind busy, to keep me out of trouble, to make sure I don't do anything wrong, and EMS. So I went through EMT school, 17-ish, and right when I turned 18, I became an EMT. I started working on the back of an ambulance, and I still love that because I was giving back to people and helping people and responding to emergency calls and driving fast. I thought, man, this is a cool holding place till I turned 20. And so I did that. When I turned 20, I then went on and became a law enforcement officer. And that was my goal. And I had these goals in mind. And in the meantime, while I was there, I had to work twice as hard, not having any help. But, I went and got my associate's degree, getting my bachelor's degree, those things were things I just had to work on, but it was not easy. And you have to be very determined to know what you want in life and your series of choices and where they'll lead you. If you don't, you'll easily end up as like I say, a product of your environment. I've been a very well. I've always lived by the thought that you are who you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself around people that's doing these things, naturally you're going to end up being like those people. But I really worked hard to get out of that circle and surround myself around good people that weren't doing these things. And I was blessed, man. I made the right decisions.
Chief Will Armstrong from the Brookford, North Carolina Police Department. The Chief, thank you so much. Fascinating story, inspirational story. And I think it's a story that I hope many people will listen to. I think it could help lead a lot of people to stay off the wrong track and get on the right one. So thank you for everything you do.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.